for hashtag Africa Focus feature here on News and Views. This is a part of the show where we focus on some of the biggest stories that are doing the rounds on the African continent. And this time around, it's a very, very concerning one. The United Nations is warning of severe consequences. This is after US President Donald Trump slashed more than $800 million from peacekeeping funds earlier this month. The cuts directly threaten missions in South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are two countries where civilians are already facing resurgent violence, instability, and humanitarian crisis. The U.S. are the single largest contributor to the UN peacekeeping and has now signaled it will completely eliminate its funding by next year, 2026. And this is raising fears that these missions may no longer be able to protect vulnerable communities. And to help us unpack what this means on the ground, we're joined by none other than a journalist and editor with Kigezi News based out in Uganda, Musinguzi Goodluck. Brother Musinguzi, welcome to Salam Media. Always a pleasure having you on our show. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Happy to be on the show from Kampala, Uganda.
There we go. I think first and foremost, let's begin with the basics. How significant are these U.S. cuts to UN peacekeeping, especially for missions in South Sudan and the DRC? You're a bit closer to the fact than we are. Have they been making a difference throughout the years?
Thank you very much. My thinking is that I can only refresh my mind when I was in the DRC, Eastern Congo, seeing those young women and children running away, carrying so much luggage under the fire of gunfire, because in the DRC, because of the minerals and because there is lack of a state setup or structure, you find that every mining area, the people who are in those areas, they tend to buy arms. And that's why we have more than 100 armed groups in the DRC. And therefore, whenever there are skirmishes, you find these young women and children trekking all the way to Uganda. One day that I'll never forget was when I reached at the border, and I hope I don't tear. These people had walked for so many kilometers. They had blistered legs. The situation was so bad. But under international law, they were asked to move inside Uganda for another 15 kilometers. And on my way, when I had taken pictures and captured whatever, and I was going back to the nearest town where I'm born, which is like more than 100 kilometers away from that border, to file my story, I saw a young boy. He was carrying a goat, a small, I don't know, a kid of a goat. And when the vehicle had moved some distance, but there was something in me that said, you have some little money, can you go back and you share something for that young boy? Maybe wherever he's going. I don't know him, and I stopped, went back, shared the little I have. So it's that pain, that money was helping those people. When you go to northern Uganda or West Nile of Uganda, in Uganda, and you find the thousands of Southern Sudanese refugees, and even now refugees from Sudan, they are all in Uganda. That's where they are trying to find comfort. And therefore, a world where war is not checked. There are no forces that can come in at the time when people need them. Of course, some people might say they might have not done so much, but at least they are there. That because when we are hopeless, how far can we go to be hopeless? But if the world is there and you know that at least to those who have those guns have been maybe cut off halfway from doing the damage that they would do. And therefore, President Donald Trump cutting off the 5 billion I saw, notwithstanding the problems you said had, I think for me, Rubio and all those people who sit in the State Department, they need to think twice. I remember in Somalia when the Americans got issues, they came back here to Uganda. They asked an African country that would be willing to go in and undo what those guys had done to the American soldiers. And Uganda, since then, has been there. The sacrifice has been so much. We have buried as many people as we can. So if America doesn't look at it that way, and it's very true that I agree with the Americans that countries should also contribute, that it shouldn't be one-sided. But also some of these forces that intervene, there is a life they save. And for me, whenever I think of when there's a challenge or a problem, I have never thought about saving thousands. I always start with one individual. But if you are to save that mother, that child, so I think up to close to this year, there's been a World Bank project in Uganda, actually, that started during the COVID. And one of the things the World Bank focused, they said the Ugandan government should build health facilities around refugee hosting districts in Uganda. And I've been able to visit most of them 2 or 3 times. And one of them is called Bidibidi. Bidibidi is in Yumbe district on the border with DRC. It's very huge. There are Southern Sudanese who are in there. So the government of Uganda has been able to build 28 health centers. But the hope it has brought, it's unimaginable. That if cholera would hit those places, people would die in many, would die and they would maybe bury them in mass graves. But today, there are health facilities. There are doctors, Ugandan doctors, who are able to go and treat these people. And therefore, my appeal to the American government is that it's beyond other countries not paying, but also it could be a breeding area for violence. And we see what happened in Somalia coming to these places. And therefore, because we have seen the Americans and the World Bank and other institutions, when they are intervening, for example, in control of disease, they know that once, for example, an Ebola case comes even to South Africa where you are, Johannesburg, Durban, and all these other places. But imagine when it goes to Washington or to London, the amount of money they use is so much. And that's why they tend to say, let's go and stop the problem at the source before it comes to us. And therefore, for me, when you stop violence, when you support the United Nations to stop violence, to put an intervention force, I think for me, that is one of the things that can help these people. And so I'm sorry for being emotional, but it's what I've seen. It's what I've gone through. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I think it's very, very important to highlight that fact that with these cuts, with these, whether it's PEPFAR or US aid or is funding cuts to UN peacekeeping operations, ultimately, we talk about the numbers and we talk about the stats, but it's human beings who are ultimately affected by it. Right here in South Africa, we, before our government woke up, immediately after PEPFAR and US aid funding was cut, we could already see in some of the local clinics in very, very poor, poverty-stricken areas, that people started not having medication for HIV and AIDS and other very, very vital, health necessities, because the government has been sleeping. And this is the case when you look out throughout Africa. We've been so comfortable with getting funding and aid from the United States that they've been resting on their laurels. America is justifying these cuts specifically by citing waste and abuse within UN operations. From your perspective, is there merit to these claims, or this is more about politics than it is about accountability?
Well, I have heard this issue, and I know from the political part of it where President Donald Trump was impeached and seems to, when you look at some of the documents, and they seem to show that USAID was part of that. So you can largely see that the politics has come in, and it's becoming a bit so much to take away the common good. So for me, if it is accountability, I think we can call for reforms from within the, we can call for reforms within the organization without cutting, giving them an ultimatum to work on some of the things that, they have not been seen to be doing very well. Because even in our homes, nothing goes on right all the time. So what we need to do is, before you cut off this money, have you asked for reforms to be made and the UN refused? So because there should be stages until when you cut. So I think for me, it's more of a political move. To those who supported Donald Trump and to those who thought, he would change the world, I think while he's changing, whatever he's doing, I think being a human being, humanitarian aid, when we support some of these interventions, it's about a human being not being degraded. And therefore, we have seen corruption is everywhere, even in the United States. We can see, we see in California, where they have gotten so many billions of dollars for a railway line and other things that have never been done. And therefore, when you have children and they don't do what is right, you can punish, but you keep also showing them the right way. And therefore, this is going to hurt Africa, and it's not really right for those who are in the State Department. But even if you comfortably remove USAID, why don't we find a way of making sure that you put on another, that you put on another organization that will help Africa and the United Nations, at least not to have issues at the end of the day. Cutting off money is killing. It's another way of saying to those who were benefiting via that money, that now, as like you have said, when you cut off PEPFAR funding that had brought hope, that those days when HIV/AIDS was, here it was the, if you have never seen people degraded, the human being wasting away. And when PEPFAR came in, those 25 years, there's so many millions of people had been saved. It's why people like the American people and the American government. But now when you cut off everything, unless you put an alternative, then we are doomed. But also I pray that these problems now don't go back to the US government, to haunt the US government. And then now you find now they are putting maybe many military bases. Now you are handling things mechanically. Instead, where we had found that people are a bit stable, because even their intervention in Congo, while they have negotiated to have a pie on the minerals, I think still peace is you can't mine where there is no peace.
Definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely. Just lastly, before I let you go, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Let's talk Africa in itself. Let's start looking more inward. What would be the appropriate response to this? Do you think maybe African Union led missions could realistically step in if UN operations collapse in these regions? Do we have the facility and the will for it? Most importantly, the political will for it? Are our leaders ready to try and circumvent the absence of the United States and the route that their new leadership has decided to take when it comes to international relations and diplomacy? Is this a wake-up call for Africa to start taking care of its own?
I agree with you. That would be the ideal point for Africa to be able to help itself. But from what we have seen happen in Africa, I think for me, I lose hope because we don't have either enough resources to put together for ourselves. I don't know whether now where would be looking at Egypt, would be looking at South Africa to foot some of these bills, Nigeria, these big economies in Africa. I think for me, we should ask for the world to help us. Maybe the BRICS, maybe we are seeing what is happening, the summit that's happening in China. Because for them, they have chosen trade and not intervening in some of these things. So for me, Africa is, it's like read when you go to sleep and when you are hungry, but you are not sure of the next meal. And therefore, Africa cannot sustain this. For example, here in Uganda, we are in Somalia, the money is dwindling. We are in DRC. We have Southern Sudan, almost the government, not so many months ago, it almost collapsed. So you find you are overstretched. And therefore, any help that comes from outside is needed. And I doubt whether now you can have, because in Africa, what divides us is most. We don't have what unites us. So, for example, in DRC, you know how SADC, East Africa, are not agreeing. And therefore, how do you ask now those people to come and do what? How do you ask those people to come and contribute? So for me, we shouldn't do an ostrich way of doing things. We put our head in the sand and then we say, you see, nobody is looking at me when the other party is being seen. And therefore, Africa, until that time, when we look, for example, at our borders, when we look at the small things, for example, you know how Uganda sacrificed so much to support South Africa. But it was, and I know internally people who were against President Museveni saying, no, why are you putting our resources to support South Africa? So Africa, totally, it would be just an opinion to say that Africa can come together and marshal resources to support some of these interventions. What is happening in Sudan? Why didn't they? And that's what even our president has been saying. When Gaddafi was beaten and eventually killed, when Africans started, African countries started sitting to look for an African solution, it was stopped. And eventually, what are the reports saying? America just wanted to remove this man and letting Africa to rise up. Nobody, it seems you have seen videos moving. We can't let Africa move. And therefore, for me, not that I don't believe in myself. For example, look at the war in terms of chips. semiconductors, all the resources that are powering AI are coming from Africa, and we even have more plenty, but nobody is allowing us again to touch that market, to have enough money so that maybe we can now look at our issues. So Africa, unless a miracle happens, for me, for now, let's say, under the spirit of the United Nations, and even September, we know this is the year, this is the month when all leaders of the world are going to be converging in New York for the United Nations. We pray that, and we pray that some of these voices may be reached to those who are in, especially the American government, the ambassadors, and all those who negotiate. That Africa, we are not able, but let them not let. But for me, I have a fear that people are going to let us destroy ourselves and come back for the minerals. So unless if each country has to be told according to how big our economies are to make a contribution. Now, lastly, as I end, you go to the African Union subscription. If countries like Congo, DRC cannot, where the Southern Sudan, even in the East African community, countries are not paying. So it would be really a dream for us to think Africa, we can pay for this, yet we have egos and those things that, it just feels so bad.
No, it definitely does. And it shows you that I think the biggest fear in the world right now is a united African continent, because the world knows, Europe knows, America knows that once Africa unites, it's over for all of them. So, yeah, I think a really concerning state of affairs. And thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Looking forward to chat to you again in the not so distant future. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
I got that was Musinguzi Goodluck. And I think, very, very emotional this time around for some reason, but it makes sense. I think it puts things into perspective. The fact that it's people, it's lives, it's children, it's young women. The story that he narrated, he saw the impact of some of these funding firsthand, and he knows the impact it will have once it has been cut. And it's a concerning state of affairs, and most importantly, it's a wake-up call for our own leaders here in Africa to stop resting on their laurels. The United States of America never promised that it will fund UN peacekeeping missions in Africa forever. They never promised that they'll fund PEPFAR forever. They never promised that they'll fund USA projects across the African continent, including here in South Africa, forever. There should have been a plan. There should have been mitigating factors from our leaders who sometimes, as Musinguzi said, you just lose hope because of the egos that are there, because of that feeling of not caring for the people of the continent by the same leaders that we've put into power. So yeah, I think a really concerning state of affairs, but one that I think should be and must be a wake-up call for our leaders. And thank you so much to our good friend, journalist and editor with Kigezi News based out in Uganda, Musinguzi Goodluck. News and Views is going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.